Hello there and welcome to the Secrets of Organ Playing podcast. I'm your host, Vidas Pinkevicius. Today's guest is Pieter van Dijk, a master Dutch organist and pedagogue. He studied organ with Bert Matter at the Arnhem Conservatory and continued his studies with Gustav Leonhardt, Alain and Jan Raas. And he was a prize winner at international organ competitions at Deventer 1979 and Innsbruck 1986. Pieter van Dijk is the organist of the St. Laurenskerk, and in addition he is the City Organist of Alkmaar. He is also the artistic representative of the city of Alkmaar in the European Cities of Historic Organs, ECHO. He is also a member of the Beirat of the Arp Schnitger Gesellschaft in Germany, as well as active in the organ commission of the Katharinenkirche in Hamburg. Additionally to concert engagements throughout Europe and the US, Pieter van Dijk is the professor of organ at the Conservatories of Amsterdam and Hamburg. His publications include articles on Matthias Weckmann, Sweelinck and Johann Sebastian Bach, and he has made several recordings on historic instruments in Spain and the Netherlands. In this conversation, Pieter will share his insights about the two world-famous organs at St. Laurenskerk in Alkmaar. Let's go to the show. Pieter, thank you so much for doing this interview. I'm so delighted that we're going to talk about one of the most fascinating organs in the world, Alkmaar St. Lawrence Church, two historical organs. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure to introduce these very well preserved instruments to you and to the audience, of course. And indeed, it is a very special place, Alkmaar. The center is a little like small Amsterdam with a lot of canals and many old houses from the 17th and 18th century. And above all, you have the large St. Laurens Church, a church from the late 15th century. And you can roughly say that the Alkmaar organ situation, in the years that the organs were made, there was a lot of money. They invested a lot of money in instruments. But the lucky aspect, summarized, is that at the moment that there was a sort of crisis in the organ building, there was no money in Alkmaar to change the instruments and to modernize them. If you compare that to the big cities in Germany, where there was always too much money and every new organist could order some stops he wished to have, that didn't happen so much in Alkmaar. And that's one of the reasons that the two organs there have been preserved so well and now are a very good guide for organists and music lovers to bring them back to the sounds of the 16th and of the 17th and 18th century.
Wonderful. Do you remember, Pieter, the first time you heard these organs in your life? Do you remember this time?
Yeah, I think I had when I was very young, I was living in Arnhem, in the east of Holland. Uh-huh. And for my birthday, I got a gramophone disc from Piet K, who was in those days organist in Alkmaar. And he made many recordings, and I remember I had a recording of him with Bach works, for example, the F minor Prelude and Fugue, and that I was very, very much impressed by the beauty of the large Van Hagebeer Schnitger organ. So first it happened on gramophone, and then I believe in 1987 I was for the first time in Alkmaar to listen to a so-called cheese market concert, which was given by my very good friend and colleague who just passed away, Jacques van Oortmersen.
Oh yeah.
He played in 87 there a cheese market concert, and I was one of the listeners, and that was the first time I heard the large organ live. And in those years, no, it must have been earlier, I think 78, because in 87 the organ was already restored. It was before the restoration, I think one of the last series before the restoration, And the large organ had, of course, a lot of troubles with the wind supply, but still you could hear the enormous beauty. And that was also very different from nowadays. The church was unplastered, so the acoustic was quite dry, and that means if you wanted to listen in the best place, you had to be very close to the organ, because every step further away, the organ became softer.
Are you talking about the large organ or the smaller organ now?
About the large organ.
The large,
yeah.
Van Hagerberg, yeah.
Yes.
Wonderful. And of course, I was so fortunate also to play both organs and to listen them at Alkmaar Organ Academy in 2000. I believe maybe 2001 or 2000. I was a student there, and I was so amazed at the complexity for a modern organist like me, inexperienced organist with any historical instruments, tried to play, these historical short keyboards with short octaves in the bass and missing accidentals, in the treble also. It was so tricky, and it became apparent to me how much of the importance is the early fingering, right, to playing these instruments, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. The choir organ made by Jan van Kovelens is at the moment the oldest playable organ in the Netherlands. It was made in 1511, so it's already more than 500 years old. And you can say that 65% of the instrument has been preserved. Among them, for example, the old keyboard and the old tracker mechanism. And we have more or less 60% of the pipework. Mm-hmm. And indeed, this manual, you can say it's a sort of origin of a keyboard manual, because it doesn't start with C in the bottom octave, but with F. And I can imagine your feeling in that time, because I think most colleagues have, for the first time, even if they are very experienced on historic organs, they feel a little strange if they sit for the first time at the organ, because the first three white keys, there are no black keys in between them.
Exactly, yeah.
So you have F, G, A, and then the first black key is the B flat. And in the top, the organ is stopping at A2, which is in fact the highest note Sweelinck ever composed for a keyboard instrument. So it was very similar to the organs Sweelinck had to his disposal in the Amsterdam Oude Kerk. And they were built in the same tradition, because Hendrik Niehoff was a pupil of Jan van Kovelens. And in the top of the manual, the G sharp is missing. So you have the G and the A without the black key in between. And, in fact, there is only one other instrument in the Netherlands having exactly the same compass, which is the instrument which stems from the same period, but it's not very clear if it was made as one piece or if it was composed later. It is the organ in Oosthuizen, which is just 20 kilometers east of Alkmaar, but which is a small village.
Wonderful. So you mentioned, of course, Jan Pieterszoon Sweelinck, the father of all German organists, right? The maker,
yes,
as they called him, and of course, the compass of his organ works is from F bass octave until A treble A, right? And it's like a vocal range of the normal choir, right? Those days, right? From F to A, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have to imagine that that the first organ music was always inspired and based on vocal music, because the first task of an organist was to accompany a choir, or to make in alternatim with choir music. So I think it's very natural that the choir sound was the big inspiration for the oldest organ builders. And you also see that, of course, in how they made their pipes.
Yeah.
So the amount of lead in the pipework of the Van Kovelens organ is extremely high. Some pipes are almost 100% lead. and that gives a very, very vocal sound.
And of course the pipes then are very heavy and very fragile, right? They need to be taken care of very, very carefully, not to be touched by hands, right?
Yes.
Very preserved very, very delicately, because of course lead is so smooth and easy to.
Yeah, it's a quite soft material, and if they are not standing exactly above their feet, you can get troubles very, 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 very early. But we had in Alkmaar, unfortunately, a big problem, as many places in the world nowadays, with lead corrosion. And there has been investigation, for example, by Goart in Göteborg about that. They made a research project, and in the last 2 years, Flentrop, the organ builder, being family firm close to Alkmaar in Zaandam, has restored the organ again, because we had big troubles mainly in the large organ with the Van Hagerbeer pipework, because also Van Hagerbeer in 1647 to 51 used very high amount of lead in his pipes. And we had big problems with corrosion, but we are happy that it was only in the lowest part of the pipe, so not in the sounding part. And many of the feet had to be renewed, and we made a lot of investigation, of course, and we hope that we preserve the instrument now, and we have changed certain circumstances in the church. So, for example, the whole heating system has been changed, because we fear that the heating system was also part in this process. But as you probably know, there are many, many places in Europe suffering of this disease. The first instrument where the focus was on was in Lübeck, the very old pipework of the Stellwagen organ in Sint Jacobi. Stellwagen reused a lot of old pipework from the 15th century, and also there was a big problem of corrosion, so 10 years ago.
Do you remember the EU Council directive about how they forbid using lead in the construction of, for example, electronics, about things like that? You remember how they tried to forbid using lead in pipework as well?
Yes, I've heard about it. Yes,
but
yeah.
Luckily, organ builders from Europe, I think, made a petition about that, and I think so far they allowed to still use lead, because if it's just standing there in the organ case, it doesn't do anything dangerous or environmentally pollution or something like that, as long as you don't take it into the mouth and chew it, right?
Yes, and of course for the pipe workers, if they make pipes, and Flentrop is making the pipes themselves, and for example for their big new organ in the Katharinenkirche in Hamburg, they also made pipes on sand, and also these pipes have a very high percentage of lead. And of course, they needed to protect themselves when they were making these pipes. But I can tell you that the result is fantastic. It's very, very stable pipework.
And what about the organs at St. Lawrence Church? Are they cast, the metal pipes, are they cast on the sand or on the cloth?
I'm not sure, but I think originally I guess it was on sand.
It was a tradition, I think, in those parts of the world to do this on sand, I think.
Yes.
Like in Ostfriesland as well, yeah.
Yeah, and of course this Van Kovelen school with the Niehoff family. Niehoff had an enormous importance in the organ building tradition of northern Germany. If you think of the organ building family Scherer, Hans Scherer, the oldest, he stood very, very under strong impression of the Niehoff organs, because Niehoff made two very important instruments in northern Germany. One in Hamburg, in the Petri Church, which was so famous that even 1 century after Niehoff made that organ, the organ was still mentioned in contracts for other city churches, that it should be as good as the Niehoff organ in St. Petri. Mm-hmm. And you see in the specification of Scherer that, for example, Tangermünde, except of course for the pedal specification, because Niehoff never made much more than one reed on the pedal. But the manual specification is very similar to the Niehoff specifications. Mm-hmm. So I think the Dutch organ building tradition in the 16th century was strongly influenced by Niehoff.
Absolutely, yes. And Peter, it's so fantastic to play these organs, right? And how vocal the sound is. But I remember also the big organ, the Van Hagerberg organ, the most powerful mixture in the pedals. Do you know the high piercing mixture? It's so profound sound. Do you know what causes the effect of this mixture?
Yeah, I think there is a sort of similarity between all the instruments having an independent pedal without pedal couplers. Let me compare it with 3 existing instruments from the 17th and 18th century. Indeed, you are completely right. The Alkmaar mixture is a very big mixture on the pedal. It has 6 to 8 ranks. And it has an extremely high composition with quite a lot of repeats. And I think it's the highest mixture of the whole organ. But you have to imagine, there was never, nowadays there are 2 pedal couplers, one to the positive and one to the great. But that was made in the 20th century. So originally, if you played with the plenum, and the Alkmaar organ is a North German concept made by Franz Caspar Schnitger. And there are more couplers than in the organs of Schnitger father, Arp Schnitger. Arp Schnitger never made a manual coupler to the rugpositief, but always a coupler great to the Oberwerk. But in Alkmaar there is of course also a coupler rugpositief great, and there is even a coupler which is called by Franz Caspar Schnitger a curious coupler, which is the rugpositief immediately to the Oberwerk. So 1, 2, 3. And that means that easily you can play with 3 manuals coupled, and then you have an enormous power and brilliance. Mm-hmm. But you have to imagine then the pedal should be clear and loud enough to support this. And I think with this very brilliant pedal mixture, the pedal department is able to make a very nice balance against uncoupled manuals, but also against all kind of couplers. And that you see many times in North German organs, that the pedal division is very separate, but there is an enormous flexibility in making a balance with the manual ensembles you make. Mm-hmm. And if I come then to other examples, Jacobi Church in Hamburg, the Schnitger organ, restored by Jürgen Arendt in 1993, has also a very brilliant pedal mixture. Many people don't use it because they say, oh, this pedal mixture is too high. But there is exactly the same reason that this mixture is so high. It's also to make the balance. And in Jacobi Church you have 4 manuals and the 3 upper manuals. So the great, the Oberwerk and the Brustpositiv you can couple. And if you then use all the mixtures, you really need the pedal mixture to get clear. And then we go to another school in Middle Germany. There is the beautiful organ from Gottfried Silbermann in Freiberg Dome. 3 manual instruments, also with a beautiful pedal mixture. And there also missing pedal couplers. And it was for me the first time I was in Freiberg a striking experience to hear that also there the pedal mixture was of such a high composition. So it was a sort of tradition, if you have no pedal couplers, that you need a mixture to make a compensation to the brilliant manual ensembles.
I see. You have to compensate, of course. Anything you can imagine on the manuals, it has to be compensated on the pedals, as long as you don't have the mixture, the coupler, of course. And Peter, you mentioned the pedal division here. Do you know if it has several winches or just one?
There are, well, the pedal, if everybody who looks to the case of the Alkmaar organ is seeing a very Dutch classical case,
yes,
comparable to Leiden, which was also made by Van Hagerbeer. And if you look to the facade, you don't see any pedal. You have this enormous middle tower, which is the principal 24-foot.
Uh-huh.
And nowadays, this principal 24-foot is in the pedal, but originally it was belonging to the grade, and the grade didn't start at C of the grade octave, but just one quint lower on F contra.
Yeah.
And that means that in the facade you don't see any sign of a free pedal. But interesting is that Franz Caspar Schnitger kept the case as it was, so there was nothing changed inside the case of the dimensions. But to the left and to the right side of the grade, so on the list of the grade organ, he played two wind chests, just like in North German organs. So these are, in fact, wind chests made for two pedal towers, and there is the pedal situated. That means there are two. There is a C side and a C sharp side pedal chest, two chests.
That's true. And of course, where is this mixture situated? Closer to the case or closer to the wall?
Well, it is just placed before the reeds, because the reeds are, of course, on the back side to be able to tune them.
Uh-huh.
So you start with the low stops, and then you go backwards, and the mixture is, in fact, I think the last labial pipes before the reeds start.
That makes sense. Yeah, you have to. It's powerful enough, but not too deep into this case. But in general, it's very narrow case, right? Can you describe the reason why the Dutch tradition is to make the organs with such a extremely narrow case?
Yeah, I think for the direction of the sound, it is extremely good. But that was very interesting. During the last restoration process, all the pipework of the organ was of course out of the organ, and then we could see exactly the places where the former wind chests were situated in Alkmaar. And nowadays it's a slider chest, and all the chests are still from Franz Caspar Schnitger, well preserved. But before it was a spring chest organ. And we are quite well informed about the situation by the organist who was the initiator of the rebuilding of the instrument in the 18th century, Mr. Havinga. Because Mr. Havinga published a book on the organs of the Laurenskerk and also mentioned the other organs in the city of Alkmaar. And he's describing quite well, and I tell now by memory, but I believe there were around 24 chests in the organ. There were even chests on places with having just one stop on it. So the whole wind chest situation has changed enormously, and well, in the big case you have now in the middle you have the grate, and then to both sides you have the pedal chests, and then you go up, and in the top you have one chest for the bovenwerk. And indeed, it's quite undeep, but therefore the reflection into the church is extremely well. And well, that's a characteristic of many of these historic organs. Even for me, knowing the organ very, very well, it's sometimes down in the church difficult to distinguish, is something played on the bovenwerk or on the rugpositief, because the bovenwerk is reflected by the ceiling so directly into the church that it sounds very close to the ear. And the grate is in fact a little more on distance, but it's giving the organ its substance, its basis, it's what we call gravity in the sound. And the grate is in fact the softest, the least brilliant worked, but of course a very good foundation to bring together either with the rugpositive or with the bovenwerk or with both of them.
And what about the rugpositive? Is it a 12-foot based, or what is the range of this of the principle in the facade of the rugpositive?
That is a principle 8 foot. 8 foot. 8. And it has it's a little a strange stop in the organ, because most pipes are from 1780.
Yeah.
There was an organ builder, Mr. Strümpfler. Strümpfler is mainly famous because of his chamber and cabinet organs. He was of course German from origin, and his largest instrument is now in Arnhem in the Eusebius Church. It was formerly in one of the Lutheran churches in Amsterdam on the Kloveniersbrugwal, and the organist in the beginning of the 20th century was the very famous Dutch organist Jan Zwart, who made the organ really popular. But he also restored the organ of Alkmaar in the 1780s, and he added this principle. And this principle has a very beautiful contrast with all the other principle stops, which are, well, we talked before about vocal principles. The Van Hagebeer sound is a very vocal sound. And this rugpositive principle is, like in the 18th century, a more instrumental imitation. It's more imitating violin sound. And it's also in the treble, it has double pipes.
Interesting feature. Do you know the reason for doing this double principle?
Well, in the Dutch organ building tradition, to double pipes in the treble was quite normal, especially in the time that the organ was really used as accompaniment instrument. And that started, in fact, in the Reformed Church rather late. You know, the Reformation took place around 1580. And the first 100 years, it was in the Calvinist Church forbidden to use the organ during the service as accompaniment. And that means that therefore also many old instruments remained unchanged. But then when it was permitted to use the organ as accompaniment instrument, all these formerly Catholic organs were in fact too soft for the huge crowds in the churches who were singing the psalm melodies. And that was one of the reasons of the invasion of many German organ builders to the Netherlands. Think of the names of the famous 18th century organ builders in the Netherlands. I named some of them. Well, Schnitger was of course one of them. And Franz Caspar Alkmaar organ was the first one in the western part of the Netherlands. He started, of course, his career in Zwolle, building the large Schnitger organ there together with his father. So Schnitger was one of them. Then a number of Schnitger students became very popular in the Netherlands. In the north it was Mr. Antoni Hinsch, who came from Germany to Holland. Another one who became a little more Dutch was Mr. Garrels. It's a beautiful instrument by him in Maassluis and in Purmerend. And we have, of course, the Bavo Church in Haarlem with an instrument by Christian Müller, also a very German name and a German organ builder. In Amsterdam Oudekerk, Christian Vater, another pupil of Schnitger, made a new instrument. And in all these instruments you have a sort of tendency to double the principal 8 foot. And the reason was that they wanted to make the melody of psalms stronger.
Yeah.
So it was to strengthen the instrument, especially in the treble. But that is a very interesting aspect, which is also happening in the earliest instruments in the Netherlands. For example, in the Van Covenants organ. And the Van Covenants organ, it was in fact discovered when it was restored just before the year 2000. because the wind chest of Van Covelens is preserved, and when the wind chest was in the workshop of Flentrop, they discovered that there were a number of gaps which were closed in later times, and these indicated that besides the principle, what we call in Alkmaar the doof, which is also doubled in the treble, that also the octave, the koppeldoof, was in the middle part two double, and in the top of the keyboard even with 3 pipes per key. So that means if you play with the doof and the koppeldoof ensemble and you play the lowest pipes, you just have 2 pipes, as is normal with 2 stops. But in the very top, for example on the A2, you have 5 pipes.
Yeah.
And that means if you play a passage and you play very low on the keyboard a chord, for the listeners it gives the impression that you play in fact a little on 2 manuals. And while you were talking about the vocal principle, it's very beautiful that if you think of how a choir is composed, you also double the higher you come, with the sopranos. You also have more sopranos than basses.
Yeah.
So it's a little the vocal principle that in the top you need for the melody a little more voices.
Exactly, just like in the choir.
Exactly.
Fewer men voices and many more women voices.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, curious phenomenon transferred to the King of Instruments as well.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And of course, this when I'm just looking at the prospect of the Van Hagerber organ, and I cannot really grasp the beauty of the wings, the paintings at the hinged doors and these things. I had the privilege of witnessing you, Peter, closing and opening these doors for us during this Alkmaar Organ Academy. And it was such a spectacular feeling to know what's inside. It was closed at the beginning, but then it opened up very slowly and gradually, right? From both the Hauptwerk or the Hofwerk and then the Rückpositiv as well. Do you know what is depicted on each door?
Yes, it is a very beautiful scene, and you know that for music there is one Bible figure which always plays a central role if there are, for example, sculptures on organs, and that is King David, who was of course a very famous harp player as well, and in fact David is showed here after he defeated Goliath. So you see King Saul sitting on a horse, and you see David, a very small man, having the head of David in his hands. So that is the main picture. You can say if the doors are closed, it's a little like a theater. It's giving a sort of choreography, and then you have in the corners you have groups of musicians. So you have women to the right side in a sort of loge, playing harp, playing lutes and singing, and you have also brass players in the other side. So it's a little the story of David, Goliath and Saul. And the interesting thing is that this story is of course a Bible story. Nowadays, if I have visitors in Alkmaar, I always have to explain it, because unfortunately, not everybody is very familiar with the Bible anymore. So you have to explain a little the stories. But there was also another symbol behind this. And in fact, what they depicted, not so clearly, but you can say between the lines of the text, is the victory of Alkmaar against the Spanish army. And then Alkmaar is then compared to David, and the Spanish army to Goliath.
Yes, exactly, because the Spanish army was so big, right, and powerful. And
yes, and they were trying to defeat Alkmaar in the 17th century. So the Spanish troops were around Alkmaar for several months, but finally they couldn't take Alkmaar. So we still celebrate on 8th of October every year. It's a big celebration, the victory of Alkmaar. And in fact, with the organ, and also the arms of the city of Alkmaar are in top of the organ. And that means that the organ in those days was really the symbol of mightiness of the city of Alkmaar. So if there were visitors, we know that, for example, that Pieterson Sweelinck, when there were important visitors in the city of Amsterdam, he was asked by the majors to play a small recital for the visitors. So the majors went to the Oude Kerk to show the proud, the most beautiful instruments of the city. And I believe that in Alkmaar that was very similar. Nowadays, I have always to inform the burgomaster about the organs, because for the present day politicians, it's not very logic that an organ is the symbol of their city anymore. But I must say, in Alkmaar we are quite happy, because the city council and the mayor are also very proud on the organ and on all our activities we do.
Of course, because you make this Alkmaar a world famous city just because of these organs.
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful, wonderful, amazing. And you mentioned King David here, and there are a few sculptures on top of the Rukpositiv I see, but none of the King David playing harp, right?
No. No, David is just depicted here with the head of Goliath. But of course there are, what is so sublime, there are many small details which you almost cannot see from downstairs. But we had a scaffolding during the restoration, and then you could stand on all levels just in front of the case, and it was so impressive to see all these very small and fine details of birds, angels playing on cornetti, with gold, certain figurations. It's really incredible. Also music instruments, lutes and horns and violins and harps are also as ornaments between the pipework.
But you cannot see that from downstairs, right?
Well, you see it vaguely, but if you do your best, you need time to figure out exactly what a richdom this case represents. Yes.
And you mentioned also just a few moments ago about the vocal quality of this principle, double in the treble, right? And even when you mentioned this, when you use the octave sound, which has 3 rows in the highest range, and then
sorry, take care. That was about the Van Covelens organ.
Van Covelens, okay.
Yeah.
But Van Hagerberg also has this treble, powerful treble in the treble, right? In the principle. So I'm wondering, was there any trick to do the bass also mightier when needed? For example, do you have anything like the basson, or just in the bass, for example, to strengthen the bass when you need it, for example?
Well, in the Schnitger design, of course, the specification is a North German specification made by Schnitger. But you can roughly say that Schnitger reused, like his father did, for example, in Jacobi Church in Hamburg. In Jacobi Church, there are many pipework from the organ which was played by Matthias Weckmann, and stops were reused by Schnitger when they were in good condition or fitting into his tonal design. And the same happened in Alkmaar. So you can roughly say that, of course, the facade, the prospect, was preserved by Schnitger. And he also took over, in fact, all the fundament stops up to the 2-foot. And what he made new were all the mixtures, the sesquialters, the cymbals, and the whole reed chorus. So you have 13 reeds in the Alkmaar organ with a lot of new sounds, sounds which were never heard and never built in the Netherlands before Schnitger. And with that, he gave a sort of brilliant crown on the instrument. So the basis is very, very fundamental, very gravity. And one of the aspects that this gravity is supported is also the pitch of the organ.
Uh-huh.
You know that many organs are either in chortone or in northern Germany even in cornet tone.
Uh-huh.
I mentioned the Jacobi Church. Jacobi Church has a pitch that A is 495.
Wow, that's very, very high. It's like a whole tone higher than normal A, right?
Yes, and that's the cornet tone. Silbermann organ in Freiberg is on 465, that is the core tone.
Yeah.
Well, you know that nowadays most modern organs are built on 440, but the Alkmaar organ is built on 415.
15?
And that is the low Baroque pitch, you can say now. And in fact, in Germany, that pitch was only used in chapels or churches where there was a king or a duke working, because then it was easy to play ensemble with organ and orchestra.
Uh-huh. So it was called Kammerton, right?
Kammerton, yes. Mm-hmm. And in those days there was one difference with nowadays. If you order an organ nowadays, you mainly pay for the labor of the making and not for the material so much. But in the 17th and 18th century, it was the other way around. So to make tin and lead and wood, that was the cost for that were very high, and the labor was very, very cheap.
Yeah.
And that means that if you made an instrument, think of this principle 24 foot, is much longer in Alkmaar than on instruments which are in cornetto.
True.
So it means that Alkmaar was indeed very rich. They could afford an instrument on chamber tone. Mm-hmm. And that is giving a very beautiful basis. And I think I cannot improve a saying by Piet K, the former organist. He said, yes, this Dutch sound of Van Hagebeer is a fantastic basis, a very vocal and very singing basis. And on top of it, there is this brilliant crown made by Schnitger with the mixtures and with the reeds. Yeah. And therefore this instrument is also incomparable to any other instruments. Of course we have other instruments by Schnitger, but if you compare it with the North German instruments, who are all very brilliant, in Alkmaar you have both things. You can say that Franz Caspar Schnitger is a sort of middle between the Middle German instruments, think for example of Hildebrand in Naumburg or Silbermann, and the more brilliant North German sound from Arp Schnitger.
Yeah.
And that makes the instrument both for North German repertoire as for Bach an ideal medium.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What about the reed stops? How many? You mentioned 18 reeds, right? There are
13.
13. 13. Are there? How many of 16-foot level are there in Van Hagebeer organ? Well,
in the situation with Van Hagebeer, that means the situation before Schnitger renovated the instrument. You can say there were only two kinds of reed stops. There were trumpets, and there was a vox humana to imitate the human singing.
Yeah.
And I think in those days there were mainly 8-foot pitch stops, reed stops, with the exception of one 16-foot, as I remember well. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And now in the Van Hagebeer Schnitger situation, all the reeds are new by Schnitger, and we have a low trumpet 16 on the grade, which is giving also the plenum a fantastic extra bass sound.
Yes.
And the trumpet 16 can also be used, of course, as a sort of solo stop for playing basses on the grade. Mm-hmm. And we have the same kind of bazuin 16, the posaune 16 on the pedal.
Yeah.
So that are the two 16-foot stops we have.
Uh-huh.
And then we have on the bovenwerk, we have a trumpet 8 by Schnitger. That is the loudest reed stop. And then, of course, a Vox Humana. All the Vox Humanas were in Holland placed on the bovenwerk, so coming out of heaven. And then there was a third reed stop, which is the hautbois. So it's an imitation of an oboe.
Uh-huh.
I think one of the very new reed stops introduced by Schnitger into the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. And this oboe has a very special shape of its resonators. You can compare it a little bit to a Baroque oboe. And also the sound is very similar, very singing. So that is the bovenwerk. Then in the great, I mentioned already the trumpet 16. There is no trumpet 8. Because there was a trumpet 8 on the bovenwerk, so if you wanted to have trumpet 16, 8 and 4, you could couple with the trumpet 8 of the bovenwerk, and there is on the great also a trumpet 4. Uh-huh. And then there is something very special on the great as well, which is a chamber musical small reed, a little comparable to the hautbois of the bovenwerk, and it's called in Alkmaar viola di gamba.
The reed stop.
Yes, it's not a string stop but a reed stop, and it's really imitating the very nasal sound of a gamba, and it works magnificent together with the principal 8-foot. So you can really try to imitate a gamba playing then.
Wow, so many possibilities for ensemble like consort sound, like
absolutely
illustrations, right?
Yes, and then in the rugpositive we have nowadays a trumpet 8. This trumpet 8 is a changed reed stop by Strümpfler. So Strümpfler, who made this principal 8 in the rugpositive. He changed. There was originally in Schnitger's organ a regal, and he used the sounding part of the reed of the regal, but he placed resonators for a trumpet on it. Mm-hmm. And you still can hear a little that the origin of this trumpet sounds a little older than it is, in fact. Mm-hmm. And then there is a bassoon, a fagot, which is very, very prompt and very beautiful. And then the third reed stop, I have always to tell a story, because on the name of the stop is written Vox Humana inferior. Wow. And I always tell my guests, well, that it doesn't mean that this Vox Humana is of bad quality. Yes. But that inferior here means, of course, that it's positioned on its lowest position, namely in the positive. Uh-huh. And it was very uncommon to have a Vox Humana in the rugpositive. So it's the second Vox Humana. And it also means that you can play certain pieces with 2 Vox Humani at the same time, which is a luxurious position, because personally I don't know instruments in the world with having 2 Vox Humanas.
No, not likely. Yeah, it's very extravagant feature.
And then finally we have the pedal department, where there are 4 reeds. Well, I mentioned before the Posaune 16. Then there is of course a trumpet 8. A trumpet 4, and on top of it, in fact, the mixture of the reed ensemble is the cornet 2, which is also a very singing quality. It's a fantastic imitation of a zinc stop. Yeah. If you have a melody, I played. You can hear that on YouTube. I've made a recording of Kommst du nun Jesu vom Himmel herunter, by Bach from the Schubler chorals, and there I use in my right hand this beautiful principal made by Strümpfler to imitate the violin. Then in the left hand I use the principal 16 and 8 of the great, so the 2 stops by Van Hagebeer. And in the pedal I play the cantus firmus 1 octave lower than notated on the cornet 2. Uh-huh. And there you can hear the fantastic vocal quality of this cornet 2.
I make sure I will include the link to this video in
nice.
the description, so that our listeners can enjoy it too.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Peter, for being so generous about this organ. And what about Van Covelen's organ? Can you explain a little bit its disposition of the stops a little bit?
Yes. Well, originally the organ had just one manual, and the case is not very high. It's just 6 foot high, and that is linked, of course, to the compass. The instrument's lowest tone is an F in the great octave, and the biggest pipes are in the middle tower. And you can say that if you look to the prospect, all the pipe work you see is also speaking, and that means that the double choir of the dove, the principal 6 foot effect, are the small fields, and the upper fields are in fact the doublers of the lower pipe work. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned before, the pipework is double in the treble. Then you have a koppel dove, which is in fact a sounding octave 4. If you are precise, you should say in this organ octave 3, because the lowest pipe is an F.
Yeah.
And then behind the octave 4, you have the mixture, which is 3 2 6 ranks. That means the lowest tone has just 3 ranks, and in the top you have 6.
Uh-huh.
And the same is true for the sharp, also starting with only a few choirs, but in the top it's very large. And these stops are then completed by the trumpet 8. That is the lowest chest, because the principal is placed on the lower chest. Mm-hmm. And if you have the 4 stops together, then you have the plenum, and the plenum, so with the dove, koppel dove, mixture and sharp. Plenum was described by Jan van Covelens himself in a contract for his instrument in Franeker, near Leeuwarden, in Friesland. And he says the plenum he describes as de principal. So the principal, the most important sound. And then you have feeded from the lower chest with conducts an upper chest, so that is halfway the prospect. And on this upper chest, you have the flute choir. Mm-hmm. And you can also say that this upper chest is in fact a sort of beginning of an Oberwerk chest. Mm-hmm. Because on the Dutch Oberwerk, for example, in the instruments of Niehoff, you see exclusively flute stops and reed stops, and almost no principal stops. Mm-hmm. So on the upper chest there is a whole pipe, 6 foot. Yep. This whole pipe is very special because all the pipes are still from 1511. Yeah. And then there is an open flute 4 foot. Half of the pipes are original and open. And there is a C flat 1/3. Mm-hmm. And also there, half of the pipes is original. And we think that this C flat was probably an invention by Jan van Covelens, because during the last restoration, the organ builders also discovered that on the upper chest there were on the place of the C flat also 3 gaps in the wind chests, mm-hmm. indicating that Van Covelens originally was planning there another stop, and we think that was a rauschende cymbal, so that is a repeating cymbal, as we have in the large organ still, 2 of them. And that gives a sort of bell effect. You can say it's a sort of cymbelstern which you can play. Uh-huh. But during the building process, Van Covelens obviously changed his mind and made a C flat. And it's a very brilliant stop. Very beautiful, with both the whole pipe and with the open flute 4 as ensemble. And it also it works very well based on 4 foot. So just the open flute and the C flat gives a very nice, very homogeneous ensemble.
Uh-huh. Fantastic. And I can remember playing the upper manual, how sensitive it is, right? And
yes,
how extremely dangerous it is to play with that thumb, right, on this upper manual.
Yes.
So it really is essential to use the early fingering with 2, 3, and 4 probably as the main fingers in both hands, except in the bass when you have larger intervals, right? When you
Yes.
use the thumb and the fifth finger. So, Peter, what could you say to the organists who are listening perhaps to this conversation and thinking, I will probably never ever have the luxury and possibility to play any historic organ with a short octave like that, for example, or the sensitive keyboard like this. Do I really need to learn early music compositions using early fingering?
That's a very difficult question. Some people say, well, we can imitate the effect of early fingering also with our modern fingering. Of course, that is to a certain degree possible, but to be very honest, I personally believe that music of the old masters like Sweelinck, J.S, but also earlier music like Paumann or from the Buxheimer Orgelbuch or Frescobaldi, Cabezon, well, you know all the names.
Exactly.
If you play that with early fingering, the speaking quality is so much stimulated. And well, apart what you said, that you are a little forced on this kind of instruments, it feels very good if you use combinations of two fingers. Mm-hmm. And of course this needs practice. Mm-hmm. And I have also an advice to everybody who is interested in playing early music but not being in the luxurious position in which I am, because I can play regularly on these fantastic instruments. I think that if you practice or if you buy a good clavichord, you have also this kind of keyboard with short keys, and also on a clavichord you can work out early fingerings very, very well.
True.
And I think that is in fact the best preparation for playing this kind of organs, because on the clavichord you are forced to make a good balance between the weight of the arm and the activity of the fingers. And that's exactly what you need. The Van Covenants organ, I mentioned before that it has its original tracker. And apart from that, and that is also amazing, and that's the manual of the Brustwerk, so the lower manual, is the original manual made by Jan van Covenants. And to give the listeners a little indication about how that feels, well, the octave distance is a few millimeters wider than we are used to. And that is very interesting, that an octave is not always exactly the same. And another characteristic of both of the old keyboards is that the distance between the black keys is not regulated. And so there are black keys where it's easy to go with your fingers in between, and others where it's problematic. Yeah. And that, of course, is dependent on the thickness of your fingers. But therefore, it also forces you to certain fingerings. And the same is true for the pedal. The pedal has a compass starting with F, and then without the F sharp and the G sharp, and ending with C. But in fact, the wideness of the pedal board is as wide as a normal pedal board. So it's measure, it's scaling, it's wider between the keys. Yes. And for guest organists in the beginning, it's always difficult to find the right notes. And you know, if you look too much to the pedal board, you lose your control over the manual. And we even have the original height of the bench. Because the legs of the bench are also original, made by lead. So you sit rather low, but it is a sensation to sit at such an instrument and to hear the beauty of its sounds. And I think it helps a lot for understanding the music by Sweelinck and Antoni van Noort and Scheidemann and all their colleagues.
Exactly. So Peter, I think our listeners can understand, even though they're not in the privileged position to play such historic instruments, the articulation which becomes natural from playing with historical fingering will transfer to the modern keyboards as well, probably, right? If you're playing with this kind of early fingering, even on a wider keys, right, of the modern.
Yeah, but I have to warn people a little bit. If you have a real modern keyboard with very long wide keys, then it can be very dangerous, because then the gaps can be too big in your articulation. And so you need a little shorter wide keys to be effective, especially if you have an upper key in your music, F sharp or B flat.
Yes.
And roughly speaking, you can say that early finger stops when you have too many flats to play or sharps, because then it doesn't work anymore. And so E flat major is not a nice scale to play with early fingerings.
Yes. Does this organ have any split keys?
No, there are no split keys. No.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Peter, for being so generous with your time and your insights today. And I'm sure Alkmaar organs are world famous now, but I hope our listeners can be curious even more and visit them in real world where Alkmaar is. But maybe you could direct our listeners for the links or the website of where they can find you and your work online. Maybe these organs, maybe the organ festival.
Yes, I have two addresses where everybody can find all the details, also about the organs with specifications and photos, and we made also blogs of the last restoration. So one of the websites is Alkmaar Orgelstad.nl.
Okay.
So Alkmaar ALKMAARORGELSTAD.nl. And the Orgel Festival is called orgelfestivalholland.nl. And there all the information about the organ festival can be found. And the next organ festival will take place in June 2017. And also there you will find information about concerts. We have every Friday from May to September. We have every Friday at 12 and 1 a so-called cheese market concert.
I remember that, yeah.
Sometimes with, in the beginning with young organists from all over the world studying in Amsterdam, and during the summertime with professional organists. And in the summer months we have on Wednesday evening the evening concerts. So there are a lot of opportunities to hear both instruments. And everybody is, of course, very welcome to visit them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Peter. You are so generous. Your work matters for probably tens of thousands of organ music lovers around the world, I would say. I am pretty positive, and I wish you all the success, all the creativity that you can muster, and all the bravery that you can show to the organ world. And you're doing such a tremendous job, and thank you so much.
You are welcome. It was a big pleasure to be interviewed by you and to tell about the Alkmaar organs, and I hope we will meet soon.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
If you liked this conversation, I encourage you to visit my blog Secrets of Organ Playing at organduo.lt, where you will find lots of insights, practical advice and training for every area of organ playing. You can subscribe to this blog for free to get your daily dose of inspiration and to be the first to know when any of my future podcasts roll out. I hope to help you reach your dreams in organ playing. I'm Vidas Pinkevicius. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you online really soon.